is dedicated to, right? Leadership, learning, and legacy. And you could see that. I mean, you could truly feel that. I talked to Dr. Wright before, so she toughed it out for a little bit and then went home. She's sick, and I know what she has because it's been going throughout the country, just wreaking havoc everywhere. And I said, no, you don't need to apologize. Go home and get some rest. What are you doing here? But she stayed long enough to say hello, so it was good to see her again. She's just a classy, gracious lady. Thanks to John Morris as well. Good to see John here. John and I go way back to when John was starting all of this with the Ronald Reagan Society. 2007, John, maybe around there. It's been almost 20 years now. And also a special shout out to Dr. Junius Rodriguez. I don't know if he's here. I don't think he's here. But this is being recorded, right? Correct? Yes. Okay, camera over there? Yes. All right, special shout out to Dr. Rodriguez for his good research on a number of different topics and items that I'll talk about tonight. In fact, I walked through his exhibit before this just to get a little bit of a refresher before I go through my own remarks. But my focus here tonight is, as Dr. Woodley said, as Sean said, the subject of young Reagan. Young Reagan. Now, the movie that we did, the biopic that came out August 2024, that's about the life of Ronald Reagan generally. So how many of you have seen it, the film? Okay, all right, good. All right, those of you who haven't, shame on you. All right, okay, get out there. What are you doing? But it was in theaters for a while. Now you can get it online. You can buy it DVD. My 16-year-old says, "Dad, no one has DVD players anymore. Where are you going to play that on, right?" But no, it's good to have that tangible thing that you can keep, that you can hold on to. But the movie came out in 2024, August 2024, and just a great cast. Dennis Quaid as Ronald Reagan is really quite amazing. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to see him yet, one thing that we were really concerned about in making the film was, who's going to play Reagan? Because it would come off, almost anybody who did it, it seemed to come off maybe as like a caricature, a parody, right? Like a Saturday Night Live skit. It's a kind of. But Dennis Quaid just kind of nailed it in a way where you no longer even, he just takes the part and just ran with it. Also, Penelope Ann Miller as Nancy Reagan was fantastic. I mean, I thought she deserved an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Actually, she was really good. John Voight was in the film. David Henry plays the young Reagan. I thought he was terrific. Now, okay, the younger people. Do you know who David Henry is? Wizards of Waverly Place, right? Selena Gomez's brother. All right, older brother, David Henry. All right, so he played young Reagan. But my focus here today. So young Reagan, I'm just going to cover the years 1916 to 1932. And I've got 7 different pivot points, which almost, if you were doing a film, would serve as almost like beats in the timeline of a script. So these are 7 different kind of vital points in the life of Ronald Reagan that made him the person that he is. And they all took place right around here, your neighborhood. Right? Your hometown boy, your local boy, his alma mater, your alma mater. So first I'll just rattle off the dates and places and then I'll go into detail. All right, fall 1916, Galesburg, Illinois. Second one, winter 1919, Monmouth, Illinois. Third one, February 22nd, Dixon. The fourth, September 17th, 1922, Dixon. You guys taking notes? You got it? No? Students, right? There's going to be a quiz on this. All right? Dr. Rodriguez and I will grade the exams. August 2nd, 1928, Lowell Park. October 16th, 1931, Eureka. And then the last one, June 1932, Eureka. All right, so here we go. First one, fall 1916. So at that point, Ronald Reagan would be how old? 5 years old. All right. A+ for Sean.
Yeah.
5-year-old. He's a lonely 5-year-old kid. His mother and father Nell Reagan, also known as Nellie, spelled N-E-L-L-E, but also Nell, Ronald Reagan often referred to her as Nellie. Father was Jack Reagan. Jack was a shoe salesman with a habit of chasing rainbows and managing this shoe store, that shoe store, always uprooting the family at every turn. In fact, at that point, already 5 years old, Ronald Reagan had moved to his third town in 5 years. Family never owned a home ever until Ronald Reagan bought his mom and dad their first home when he struck it big in Hollywood in the late 1930s, early 1940s. In fact, he gave Jack a job of answering his fan mail at that point, and Jack lived not really long enough to enjoy it, died in 1941. But Jack was constantly moving the family all the time, and so they had just relocated to Galesburg, Illinois for his latest shoe selling job. Reagan at that moment, so he's this lonely kid, already he's learning that you can't really make friends because as soon as you make a friend, the friend kind of disappears in the taillights when you're leaving in the car, looking back behind you. We have a scene in the movie where the young Reagan gets a bully was beating him up on his way home from school. So he wrestling with the loneliness of a little boy who just moved to his third new town in 5 years. He ventures alone to this attic in this house in Galesburg, Illinois. And I give you the address of the place. You can drive by it if you want to know the address. The previous tenant had left behind very few things, but the tenant left behind birds' eggs and also butterflies that were encased in glass. And so Ronald Reagan, this 5-year-old boy, Dutch, would escape into that attic for hours at a time, just marveling at the intricacies of what he considered God's creation. The wings, the eggs, the richness and the color of the eggs. Reagan would later say this, as a first grader, I marveled at the rich colors of the eggs and the intricate and fragile wings of the butterflies. The experience left me with a reverence for the handiwork of God that never left me. These wonderments were like gateways, as he described them. The notion of a creator at that point is kind of etched into his young consciousness. He later thanked that previous tenant as, quote, an anonymous benefactor to whom I owe much. So whoever that tenant was could not have imagined that just by leaving behind birds' eggs, butterflies encased in glass, that he's helping to mold the thinking of a future president of the United States, of all things. So that's first kind of pivot point. Second one, winter 1919, Monmouth, Illinois. How far of a drive is that from here? Monmouth? Hour, about an hour. So the family at that point had moved yet again. Ronald Reagan's 8 years old. Jack moved them to another place. They had already been in Tampico a couple times at that point, born in Tampico. The family moved this time when Dutch was in just second grade. At that moment, winter of 1919, the town of Monmouth, like all of America and much of the world, is hit by the influenza epidemic. Devastating epidemic. I got a call a few years ago when Ronald Reagan was still alive, and I think it was the 90th anniversary, it would have been his 90th birthday, and it was from the editor of the Monmouth newspaper, and he asked me, he said, I'm the editor of the Monmouth newspaper. I said, oh yeah, Ronald Reagan's hometown. He said, that's right, Ronald Reagan's hometown. And I'm trying to find out if anything really of significance happened to Reagan in Monmouth. Probably not, right? But I'm told that you would know. Yeah, that's me, I'm the Reagan geek, I would know. And I said, yeah, actually something really significant happened to him there. That plague, that influenza, it was called the bird flu, right? And overall killed around the world probably 20, 30, 40 million people around the world. Followed what happened in World War I with about 10 million people who died in the battlefields of Europe. In America, 675,000 people died from that flu in that winter. That's more than America lost in the Civil War, 600,000 people in the Civil War, our largest death toll of any battle. In fact, we had just come back from World War I, about 100,000 boys died in World So 675,000 people. And it was a really mysterious virus in that most viruses kill the very young, infants, and the vulnerable, right, the very old. COVID, right, really hit people who were older with comorbidities. This one hit perfectly healthy middle-aged 30-year-olds who had nothing wrong with them, and we contracted, and bam, they were done in a couple days. It hit Nell Reagan. It hit Nell Reagan. She came very, very close to dying. Ronald Reagan said, "We thought she was a goner. We thought that we were going to lose her." If Nell Reagan had died that winter of 1919, I am convinced Ronald Reagan would have never become president of the United States. I mean, she was that fundamental and formational to everything he did. If you want an example of a mother who made a president, I mean, that's it. I dedicated my first book on Ronald Reagan to Nellie Reagan because she was that much of a formative figure in his life. All right, pivot point number 3, February 1922. And we put this in the movie. We put this in the film. I was hoping the scene would be longer, but I think we ended up with 130 minutes, which is already a long time for a film, and you gotta crunch everything. People don't sit for long movies nowadays. It drives me crazy. Anyway, so February 1922, 11-year-old Ronald Reagan is walking home, and at this point he's in Dixon, Illinois, so he's moved to Dixon at this point. And he's walking home from the YMCA. Very cold, brisk February day in Dixon, Illinois. His mother, Nellie, is out on a sewing job, trying to scare up a few bucks because, again, Jack has another job and he's not doing very well, and they're renting this place too, and people are bringing him food. Nell is not at the house. Ronald Reagan gets there, the young 11-year-old Reagan, and he looks out, and there, lying in the snow, he sees his father, arms outstretched, smashed, drunk, intoxicated. And Reagan would later describe him in his memoirs as arms stretched out as if he was crucified, as if he was crucified. Ronald Reagan loved his dad. His dad was a fabulous storyteller, a lot of fun, right? Jack Reagan was a lot of fun. But to quote Ronald Reagan's daughter, Patty Davis, he couldn't really rely on his father. He couldn't really rely on him. That moment, he looks down at his father in that position, and he picks him up. Neighbors are starting to look. Neighbors are starting to stare. And he drags him up the steps, drags him inside, drags him upstairs, and put him to bed. I remember telling that story one time to B. Kenneth Simon, who was the benefactor of my book, The Crusader, that the film was based on. And I was telling him this during lunch, and Ken just started crying. Like this 80-year-old man, tears are running down his face. And I said, "Wow, you're really touched by that." And he said, "You know, I'll never forget being a kid, Irish Catholic kid in Pittsburgh, out on the street one day, seeing my dad come out of a bar, bouncing off of buildings because he was so drunk." He said, "I can't tell you what that does to a young man. I mean, this is the person who cradled you, carried you, and to suddenly see your father like that, so out of control." I can imagine how it affected Ronald Reagan. When it happened with Reagan, this was a crucial time in his spiritual development. He talked to his mother about it, and his mother responded by giving him a book called That Printer of Utils, written in 1903 by Harold Bell Wright, who was a Disciples of Christ minister. That was the denomination of Ronald Reagan's mother, of Nellie. And that book talks about this boy, little boy who's about 11 or 12 years old, exact same age as Dutch Reagan at that point. Father's a drunk. Little boy's name was Dick Faulkner. Ronald Reagan would later say that this was the book that made the most lasting impression on him, more than any other. But at the start of the film, Dick is there next to his father's bedside. His father, his mother is dying. Mother's dying words are, "Oh Lord, please take care of old Dick." She dies, she passes away, almost like Nell Reagan could have. And at that moment, Dick runs away. He goes and becomes, in those days it was called like a hobo, homeless guy. And then what turns his life around, he goes into a local community. His mother taught him, Dick, you can always find comfort in a church. So he goes past a church, he hears singing inside, goes into the church, and the people reach out to him. They take care of him, they bring him in. Pretty soon he becomes an upstanding member of the community. The community eventually elects him and sends him off to Washington, D.C., a kind of a shining city upon a hill moment to go out there and change the world. And the last moment you see with Dick in the book, he's there being sworn in, about to be sent off. His girl, Amy, who has big brown eyes, think Nancy Reagan, right, standing at his side, admiringly watching him. And he's sent off at that point to change the world and change Washington. Well, Ronald Reagan closes that book, walks over to his mother, Nellie, and says, I want to be like that man, and I want to be baptized. So it's at that point that he's taken to the church of Ben Cleaver in Dixon, Illinois. Although Ben wasn't there yet, we'll get to Ben in a few minutes, as the previous pastor, and he's baptized. So the irony of that, his father laying there in the snow convinced him that as much as he loved his father, he couldn't rely on his earthly father. He needed a higher father. And that's what his mother taught him, that he could always look to, could always count on. All right, so pivot point 4. September 17th, 1922, Dixon, the Reverend Ben Cleaver. As I said, it wasn't Ben that baptized Ronald Reagan, it was a previous pastor, June 1922. But Ben delivers his first sermon at the First Christian Church on South Hennepin Avenue in Dixon, Illinois. He and Dutch Reagan hit it off right away. They just got along, and there was an added factor. Dick's daughter, or Ben Cleaver's daughter, Margaret Muggs Cleaver. I'm talking about Eureka grads here, you guys, right? All these different figures. The two were very serious, Ronald Reagan and Muggs. They, even into the 1930s, Reagan was convinced that he was going to marry her. Said, Muggs is the girl for me. Muggs is the girl for me. Muggs' sister Helen said, naturally, he was often in our home, and he felt the influence of Father's guidance during those formative years. He was as close to being a preacher's kid as one could be without being the preacher's own kid. Practically, the manse at the First Christian Church was pretty much his second home. Cleaver was a highly ambitious pastor, extremely well-read, went to the University of Chicago, learned to read Hebrew and classical Greek, would instruct his parishioners in words like, what are the Hebrew roots of a word like baptism? Was far from being provincial, very well-read, curious, patriotic, strong belief in the American founders, loved Washington, loved Lincoln, spoke at the American Legion, intensely anti-communist, which probably also rubbed off on Ronald Reagan. And he was there at exactly the right time for Ronald Reagan. Ben came to Dixon in 1922. Reagan had come there just a year or two before. And he's there right up until the time that Ronald Reagan leaves to come to 1928, 1929, to come to Eureka College. And I would say at that point that it was Ronald Reagan look back at Ben Cleaver and say, Ben Cleaver put God in my life at that moment in order to develop me at that key moment. Reagan comes to Eureka. Where does Ben go? Eureka College. He comes here as well. Pastored at church here. Ronald Reagan would describe these people as his inheritance. There was the life that has shaped my body and mind for all of the years to come. That town, those people, he said, was a small universe where I learned standards and values that would guide me for the rest of my life. The people in that town, he later told Ben Cleaver's family in a letter that he wrote when Cleaver died. He died in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. They provided me with an unshakable faith and a peace beyond description. A peace beyond description. All right, pivot point number 5. What was it, remember? No? All right, I told you to take notes. August 2nd, 1928, Lowell Park, Dixon, Illinois. So that day, it's about 9:30 at night. Ronald Reagan is closing up the snack stand, the beach house, with Ed Grable, who lived right across the street from him in Dixon, Illinois. So the beach was owned by Ruth and Ed Grable, neighbors of Reagan. Reagan would get a ride there with them every day. Reagan was a lifeguard there for 7 summers, 7 days a week, like 12 hours a day. And he got paid about $15 a week and got food from the snack stand for food. I mean, not much, right? It wasn't getting paid much. So that day, August 2nd, 1928, there's a local guy in Dixon named James Rader, a friend of his, and 2 girls. And they're all kind of looking to go swimming, have fun at the beach after it's closed, after it's 9:30, which you should never do because that beach is already dangerous, very treacherous. In fact, you go to that beach today in that spot where Reagan used to lifeguard, you're not allowed to swim there today. I mean, it's the currents, the dark swirling water, it's dangerous. Swimming is actually banned there today. So it's about 9:30 at night, they're closing up the snack stand, and all of a sudden, Reagan and Mr. Graybill hear yelling and screaming from the Rock River. And the girls are yelling, he's drowning, help, help. So Dutch Reagan at that point, it's dark, it's already dark outside, goes running down toward the beach, dives into the river. I mean, he wore glasses, he had terrible eyesight, but he almost knew instinctively what to do. Swims out into the water, gets a hold of James Rader, drags him out, brings him up onto the shore. I think probably had to provide mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, I'm not exactly sure, I tried to confirm that. And brought him up and saved his life. That incident was actually reported in the Dixon Evening Telegraph a couple days later, under the headline, James Rader saved by Ronald Dutch Reagan, 25th save. Ronald Reagan's 25th save. Altogether, during those 7 years that he was a lifeguard, Ronald Reagan saved the lives of, anyone know how many people?
77.
77 people over those 7 years. 77 people. I mean, I've had students at Grove City College tell me, I've been a lifeguard, Professor Kengor, for 4 or 5 years. I never saved anybody. I mean, I never had to do a rescue at the local pool or whatever. 77 people's lives that he saved. And I talk about that in the opening of the book, The Crusader, and we had it throughout the movie. David Henry plays Ronald Reagan as a lifeguard at that beach. Because I'm convinced that more than anything else, that's what forged in Reagan. That and the faith, this sort of supreme confidence that he could play the role of world saver. So when he comes around in the early 1980s and talks about saving the world from the scourge of atheistic communism, and everybody else, I mean, those of us who lived through it at the time, right? Early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan talked about communism ending up in the ash heap of history, everybody said, no way. I mean, the Soviet Union, Larry, right? George, Soviet Union's gonna be around for the next 50, 60 years. There's no way it's gonna end up in the ash heap of history. But Reagan predicted it, and Reagan alone thought he could do it. And I'm convinced that the confidence that he gained as a lifeguard, more than anything else, convinced him that he could do something like that. All right, pivotal moment number 6. Sorry I'm sweating so much, it's hot up here. Pivotal moment number 6, and this one is the most touching to me. 20-year-old Eureka College junior, Ronald Dutch Reagan, is getting ready for a football game. It's October 16th, 1931. Kudos to Dr. Junius Rodriguez for figuring out the exact date and the exact team. They're playing Elmhurst on a Saturday. It would have been October 17th. So the night before, they are in the team bus, and they are driving to go to Elmhurst. They have to stay at the hotel the night before. They stop at a hotel, and the coach, Ralph Mac McKenzie, is inside. He's being delayed. No one knows exactly what's going on. So Dutch Reagan, already a natural leader, he comes in to find out what's going on from the coach. And they find out that the hotel clerk tells them that they're not going to be allowed to stay at the hotel that night. Actually, the whole team can stay at the hotel, with the exception of two black players, William Franklin Berge Burghardt and Jim Rattan. So all the rest of the team can come in, but they can't. They're not allowed to come in. Mac McKenzie is just livid. He's furious. Reagan, really embarrassed by this, can't believe it. And so Mac McKenzie says, well, then we'll sleep on the bus. And Reagan says, no, you can't do that. If we sleep on the bus, none of the guys are going to have a good night's sleep. Some of them might get sick. We'll go out and lose tomorrow. Then everybody will hold it against Berge and Jim. I'll tell you what, Mac, I have an idea. Give me some cab fare. My house is not far away. I'll bring them home to my house. Mackenzie's like, really? Your parents would be cool with that? Be all right with that? It's like, yes, I know my mom and dad. So they knock on the door. Nellie opens the door, Jack opens the door, and Nell says, come on in, boys. Come on in. We put that scene in the movie, and I was so glad that it was in the movie. My only regret about the movie is it's not longer, because it's such a deep moment. Ronald Reagan told that story, I'll tell you guys, hundreds of times. If I had to chronicle every instance where he told that story. And he especially told it because he and Berge were close friends. Ronald Reagan later said in 1981 to a Washington Post reporter, he said, William Franklin Berge Burghardt was probably the closest friend I ever had. They weren't just teammates, they were buddies. They were close friends. They were both, in fact, if you go out here and take a left, you'll see Junius Rodriguez has put up some placards, right, with descriptions. There's one of Udell Watts, there's also one of Willie Sue Smith, and there's another one of Berge Burghardt. So he came from Greenfield, down at the bottom of the state, was the son of a barber. His father owned a barber shop. And like Ronald Reagan, his dad didn't have much money, although Berge's dad was probably a bit more stable. Berge, like Dutch, majored in sociology and economics. They competed in classes over who would get the better grade. And Berge said, neither one of us had 2 dimes to run together. We were both broke. They both faced discrimination. In fact, Berge's father obviously did in what he faced in Greenfield. And Jack Reagan did too, as an Irish Catholic. It's hard to describe what that was like at the time. And in fact, Jack talked about going into a hotel and witnessing a hotel clerk turning away a Jewish person. And Jack said that I'm not going in either. And the guy said, what's up with you? And he said, I'm Irish Catholic. And if you're gonna turn away Jews, pretty soon you'll turn away Catholics too. Jack went out and slept in his car and ended up with a terrible virus that the Reagan kids to this day are convinced may have led to his premature heart failure. So Jack had the same kind of experience and slept in the car and froze that night. Reagan and Berge were very, very close. I noticed that Max Boot in his new book on Ronald Reagan says that, well, Reagan met these people, a few black classmates at Eureka, then they seldom ever communicated after that. No, absolutely not true. They remained in touch for the rest of their lives, so much so that on August 6, 1981, Berge was going into surgery for a lung procedure. Now, August 6, 1981 is the presidency, the Reagan presidency. Larry Reed, when was the Reagan tax cut signed?
March?
August 13th, 1981. All right. So August 6, 1981. It's an extremely busy day. I went through and I looked through all the presidential records. By the way, Reagan had incredible stamina as president. I mean, the guy, it was said he was too old when he was 70, right? Now it's laughable now, isn't it? But that day, President Anwar Sadat of Egypt had arrived the night before for a formal state visit and dinner.
Mrs. Reagan and the president and Mr. and Mrs. Sadat were up dancing until about 11 p.m. They retired that night about 12:15 a.m. Reagan had been shot himself a few months earlier, right? I mean, the guy's recovering from that. Wakes up August 6th in the morning, holds a breakfast with Sadat. Then the two give formal remarks. The president signs a bunch of different treaties, this statement, that statement, meets with Jim Baker, Ed Meese, Mike Deaver. I could really belabor this point if I want to. Leonore Annenberg, Al Haig, Cap Weinberg, Richard B. Allen, all before 10:50 a.m. Calls former President Richard Nixon, all before noon on August 6th. Calls his own doctor to talk about his own recovery from being almost assassinated March 30th, 1981. And then all of that, middle of the day, with a whole bunch of stuff going on, says, I have to call Bergie. I have to call Bergie. So at 12:04 p.m., he calls your fellow alum, William Franklin Bergie Burghardt, 12:04 p.m., to talk to him before he goes into surgery. Bergie's worried about it. He comes out of the surgery barely, but it's not good. The prognosis is not good. Reagan's very concerned. He has to go to California to the Reagan Ranch, the Santa Ynez Mountains. He finds out when he lands that Bergie died. So Saturday, August 8th, 1981, at the Doctors Hospital of Prince George's County, Atlanta, Maryland. Bergie had gone on to get his PhD at NYU. He was Dr. William Franklin Bergie Burghardt. He succumbed to cardiac arrest not long after the lung surgery. Reagan immediately telephoned Bergie's wife, Dr. Ida Stevens Burghardt, from California. First tried calling her at 12:17 p.m., couldn't get through. Tried again at 12:42, did make contact. They talked for several minutes. Bergie was 69 years old. So the last time that Ronald Reagan had seen him was on the campaign trail in 1980. They spent an afternoon together in Virginia, he and Bergie. Bergie then traveled with Reagan on a campaign swing to Detroit, during which Reagan was endorsed for president by Ralph Abernathy, the personal aide to Martin Luther King Jr., and the great civil rights leader Hosea Williams, whose brother was tragically killed. 5 years after Bergie's death, Ronald Reagan remembered him fondly and publicly in a speech to students at Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School in Washington, D.C. on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 15, 1986, a date that Reagan signed into law and never opposed. If you read the first press conference where Reagan is asked about a Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, I can give you the date, you could watch it online. He says, I'm not opposed to it, but I need to look at it, and would you mind if I had some time to look at it? It'd be a federal holiday. We only have a few of those. And they looked at it and he approved it. But Reagan spoke at 11 a.m. and he said to these students at MLK Elementary School, I thank you so much for inviting me here today. This is where I wanted to be. Thank you, my friends. God bless you all. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a second. I have to tell you a story. He's saying this extemporaneously. An experience of mine in my youth. I was playing football in a little college in Illinois. And this was back in the days before any Martin Luther Kings. He had just been barely born, but there were people with prejudice and hatred. In our school, we had a young black man who came to school and who I remember. He's departed this world now, but he's probably the closest friend I ever had. And down on the line together, he played center and I played right guard. Reagan didn't play left guard, he played right guard. And in those days, you didn't have an offense and a defense, you played both ways. You stayed in the game till it was over. And he and I became, as I said, the closest of friends down there in the middle of the line when things got rough and tough. And one day we played a team that didn't have any mix in its lineup. And playing opposite Bergie, his name was Franklin Burghardt, but my nickname for him was Bergie. Playing opposite Bergie was a fellow that was filled with hatred and prejudice, and it was very obvious. And he was very vocal about it, and when we would line up against each other. He also played dirty against Bergie. In the huddle, I looked across once, and I saw Bergie, and his lip was bleeding. where he was biting it. This guy was taking cheap shots at him, punching him in the mouth, jumping off sides, this white player who was across from Bergie. He had already had an injured knee before the game, and this fellow had found out about it. Evidently, he groaned at the wrong time. You don't show your weakness, right? So my buddy TJ Watt for the Steelers, right? You can't tell the Cleveland Browns that you're ailing that day because you still need to be double teamed. It helps out the team. You don't say anything, right? So Bergie was biting his lip, not showing the pain, and in the huddle, we were so mad. And all of his teammates, we wanted to go after that fellow. And Bergie said, no, this is my problem. This is my fight. And no one knew anything about it. Well, Bergie played him all that game. He didn't play dirty, he played clean. He just played the hit 'em hard kind of football that we're taught and that's within the rules. Very Eureka College-ish, right? By the middle of the fourth quarter, his opponent, playing dirty with all of his dirty tricks, was literally staggering. And his coach had to send in a substitute for him, and he started off the field. He was wobbling as he started off, and halfway to the sideline, he stopped, stood there for a minute, then he turned around, and he came staggering back, elbowed his way through the two teams as we stood there in the timeout waiting for play to resume, and he walked up to Bergie, and he faced him. And then I saw he was crying. The tears were running down his face. And he stuck out his hand, and Bergie took it and shook his hand. And he grabbed it with his other hand, and then crying, he said, I just want you to know you're the greatest human being I've ever met. That's quite a statement. And he turned and he left the field. Wow. Amazing. So that was what Reagan witnessed. He told that story a number of times. He told it to Mark Shields, a sports reporter of the Washington Post, in a February 1981 interview, and he got choked up. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble telling this story. And then he told the story that I just did. So Reagan wrapped up his remarks that day to these kids at MLK Elementary School by saying this. You see, just one individual with principles like that, like Dr. King and like Franklin Burghardt, a conversion right there from hatred to respect and even liking on the part of another man. Well, I just couldn't go away without telling you that story. The world is so different today. He celebrated the America of the 1980s was much different, much improved, not perfect, but certainly better racially than from the 20s and 30s. He urged these youngsters, you keep it that way and you keep making it better. All right, I gotta wrap up. Seventh and final pivot point. I'm probably over the time on the clock. June 1932, this one's a lot shorter. Eureka College, right? June 1932. Ronald Reagan graduates. He had said when he was a high school freshman at Dixon High School in Dixon, Illinois, he had said of Eureka College, I wanted to go to that college so bad that it hurt. I wanted to go here so bad that it hurt. So this is where he wanted to be. This was it. This is what he aspired to. And I don't need to tell this audience all that happened here. You can just walk around campus, right? Look at the signs, look at the statues, walk to the buildings, see the stage over there where he first spoke publicly. But it was here at Eureka College that he learned and really began developing, among other things, his communication skills that would serve him so well throughout his career as president. In fact, beyond just character and the faith he learned here and what he learned from Bergie and Udell Watts and Jim Rattan and others, but the communication skills. He headed straight from here to Iowa, got a job in radio, which was not easy to do, but it was at the time when radio was the dominant form of communication in America. Gets a job at a station in Davenport, Iowa, which was soon consolidated with its parent station, the 50,000 watt blowtorch, WHO radio in Des Moines, an NBC affiliate. Much bigger job. He actually recreated Chicago Cubs baseball games from the WHO studio. So he would get the report over the wire of what would happen from play to play. And he would say, and there's Smith with a single out to right field, right? Ball one, ball two, play by play. One time when the thing froze, he had and nothing came over the transcript for like 10 minutes. He had the guy fouling the ball off over and over and over and over again. And he ran into one guy one time and said, how many times did that fellow foul off the ball? It's gotta be a record, right? He was like, I don't know. But his voice emanated throughout households in the Midwest. He began to receive national exposure, and it was from there that he went to Hollywood in the 1930s, made all of those movies, and that was the start of the great communicator. From Dixon, over here to the stage at Eureka College, then to Iowa, then to California, radio, movies, and then to politics, and eventually the presidency. But it all began here in these little towns in Illinois and at this little Christian college. So, thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions if we have time. I don't know if we have time or not. Hope I didn't speak too long. Thank you.
Yeah, great.